Namaskar and welcome to Public Forum. I'm Charu Karthike. In this edition of Public Forum, we will be talking about the legacy of former Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, who passed away recently. Joining me in the studio today is a distinguished panel of experts, a fantastic panel as far as the subject is concerned at least. Kallol Bhattacharjee, special correspondent with The Week. Kallol, thank you so much for coming here. Dr. Sriram Cholia, well-known foreign affairs analyst, professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Sriram, thank you so much for coming here. Dr. Wael Awad, senior journalist, very well-known on West Asian affairs, South Asia Bureau Chief with Sana. Dr. Awad, thank you so much for coming here. And Qamar Agha, foreign affairs journalist, former professor at Jamia, and again, well-known West Asia expert. Qamar Saab, thank you so much for coming here. All right, Sriram, how would you like to remember Ariel Sharon?
Well, the two adjectives people have used, extreme ones. One is bulldozer. The other is butcher. And both have come from extreme perspectives. Bulldozer has been used especially in light of the settlements that he erased and earned the wrath of in many ways the progeny of his own creation, because he was the one who had inherited, who had initiated the idea of massive settlements to change the status quo ante on the ground in the occupied territories. But later on, as he turned against at least evacuating the settlements from Gaza. So bulldozer has been used in that context by some people. In other contexts, people have said that he was so decisive that he never thought about the consequences as much as willfully trying to change the politics and secure Zionism and the Israeli state project at all costs, sometimes violating international law. So bulldozer, butcher, of course, is the name he has received from all the victims of many of the massacres from 1953 all the way up to 1982 and beyond. Some significant milestones which are marked in blood. So Sharon, I think, one characteristic for me would be, I think he was always...
in your understanding, is he somewhere between, or which of these adjectives was he closer to, somewhere in between, or something absolutely
I think it's very partisan, a very divisive figure. I think the only characteristic that will stand constantly throughout his career, if you look back, is his belief in retaliation and massive retaliation. And this unfortunately has also led to many human rights abuses, and he's wanted as a war criminal by in the eyes of many people on the left, both in Israel and among the Arabs. So I think he believed in the idea of, if you look back at the critical moments, I'm talking about 1953, for example, when they created this special operations group, Unit 101. It was one of the early examples of how Israel would go to any length in order to quote-unquote secure its people and its land, right? And the belief was that in retaliation for any kind of aggression upon our people, we are going to use maximum force. So this unfortunately has become part of Israeli tradition now. So, and remember, Sharon was part of the Haganah, which was the early Zionist guerrilla movement even before the state was created. Then the Israeli Defense Forces, then general, then commander, and all these things. So all along, I think for me, the takeaway is, he also made compromise, as I mentioned, on Gaza. But at the end of the day, his logic was, for security, I will do anything. And I think that in today's time, if we want really peace, I think it's not possible to hold on to such kind of hardline view, simply because if you don't compromise and if you don't soften, then Israel is facing a demographic time bomb. It's going to, So I think some people argue that if Sharon had lived and had not gone into coma, maybe we would have achieved a peace process sooner. But that's a counterfactual. We don't know.
Absolutely.
But as long as he was there,
it's better to remember what he did actually, and what rather than what he did not, or rather than what he could not. Sriram, the evacuation from Gaza also marks a point when Ariel Sharon was forced to leave his own party, Likud, and establish a new party, the Kadima, which has from then on been known as a more centrist kind of a party. So does this point in his career, does it represent an attempt to change the kind of, or the brand of politics that he was so far associated with?
Yeah, see, the previous image of Sharon that stands in people's minds was when the Americans were brokering the Oslo Accords. There's a famous picture of Sharon standing face to face with Yasser Arafat and refusing to shake hands with him, while the other Israeli leaders did. So he represented the strain, and at that time he was still the darling of the settlers and of the hardline Zionists who believed that the whole land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea belongs to us. And so I think over time, what happened between 2000 and 2005, remember there was the Intifada, and there were a number of suicide attacks, and Hamas was increasingly becoming popular. So it could be seen also as, because in his logic, Gaza was becoming a liability just to control such a small slice of land, which is so densely populated, and where Hamas is increasingly popular and replacing Fatah.
Okay.
And Hamas is, of course, far more dangerous from the Israeli point of view than Fatah by that time, because they were learning to work with Mahmoud Abbas, who was seen as docile after Arafat's death. So at the time it was felt like Gaza was, let's drop this hot potato from a strategic point of view, and we will still have the bulk of the land, and including, of course, the big chunk which is the West Bank. The other point of view is that it strengthened Hamas. There are many people who look back at it as a strategic mistake, because then the rocket fire increased from Hamas into Israeli territory, and of course they had mini wars.
But why did he put so much at stake for doing this? Why did he put his own career at stake? He was forced to leave his own party and start a new party.
I think it must have been driven by internal Likud factional fighting and so on. And secondly, as I said, I think he was looking at, if at all we have to come towards an end to this kind of daily violence, one way of it is to just let go of some of the strategically less important ones and hang on to the main ones, and thereby concentrate more forces and pressure where they thought was much more central. And that strain continues to this day. I mean, if you think about it, long after Sharon went into coma, no matter which party has been in power, the pressure has been, for example, Jordan Valley. Nobody wants to give up Jordan Valley. Now, even today, as Americans are trying to broker an agreement, people are saying, Kerry should agree to the Israeli precondition that we will allow a two-state solution to come up only if the entire Jordan Valley is policed by Israeli military as a kind of a security wall against future. But what Sharon did, and unwittingly perhaps, is to create a precedent, which is say Israel can withdraw if their preconditions are met. So it goes back to the point that Sharon may have wanted peace, but on Israeli terms. Well, certainly if you see the American role, that has significantly changed under Obama. Obama has been relatively more neutral than several of his predecessors on the Israeli-Palestinian question. And if you look back, in many ways Netanyahu is defying the US just as Sharon had done. I'll quote you from the Sabran Shatila massacre declassified data. Sharon, as defense minister, arguing with Morris Draper, who was the US Middle East envoy. And Sharon says, when it comes to our security, we have never asked. We will never ask. When it comes to existence and security, it is our own responsibility. We will never give it to anybody to decide for us. So there have been instances, so this defiance of the United States, Netanyahu is now doing it openly. I mean, he tries to work around behind Obama's back, trying to sabotage Obama's approach towards Iran, as well as directly on the peace negotiations that Kerry is trying to kickstart. Kerry was hoping that 9 months we'll reach a final settlement. Now they are saying at best we can announce a framework. Even in the framework, it's been said that the Americans are bowing to the Israeli insistence. So what does it mean? I mean, Rashid Khalid has written an amazing book about dishonest brokerage of the United States. So in that sense, now in many ways the Israelis are trying to wait out. They are hoping that after Obama they are going to get go back to a more conservative regime in Washington, which may not happen, and then we will press home our demands even more. So it's a very unequal kind of negotiation. The peace process is going on, and the Palestinians increasingly feel marginalized and that they really have no hope. And because of that, Hamas still has popularity and backing, because Hamas is seen as the last force that is going to resist this kind of unequal peace treaty that Fatah is trying to sell out. So if the Israelis don't see that more radicalism is coming, if the Israelis don't see that the demographic time bomb is ticking and they'll become a minority in their own homeland soon, I think it shows short-sightedness. So I think it requires, I don't know if Sharon was around and if he really was this strategic genius, maybe he would have seen that, we need to make amends for this and change our tack and not insist on, it was like, give no quarters. That was Sharon's whole legacy, right? And I think they will need to compromise. Otherwise, I think Sharonism may not apply in today's time.
Okay, Sriram, your take on that?
Two-state solution technically is achievable, but it can only further exacerbate interstate warfare. Instead of it being, violence between occupiers and the natives, it can become interstate warfare. So I think it doesn't look very promising. The other problem has been, since Sharon went into coma and left the scene, the Israeli leaders have been obsessed with Iran, and increasingly so. And they have in many ways said that, the Palestinians, that's not a main issue. The main threat and the main problem is Iran now. The only problem with this argument is that that's connected to Gaza, because Hamas has been, supported by Iran for a long time. So if you argue that, Iran is a problem, then it also implicates security in Gaza and the relationship with Egypt, which is next door to Gaza. Israelis have been supporting the new Egyptian regime since the military takeover. So all the regional signs are not propitious.
Okay.
And but on paper, through some kind of to save face for their American allies, they may agree eventually to some kind of two-state solution, but it's going to be really, really watered down. I mean, if you think about it territorially, Gaza and Hamas and West Bank are separated. They are not contiguous. What is the viability of that kind of state? We have seen such states break up in our region, East Pakistan, West Pakistan.
Okay.
So how are they going to create the connectivity between these two? They're saying we're going to do some swaps and so on. So it doesn't look very viable or bright or hopeful. And I think we have to exorcise some of the extreme tactics of and strategies that Sharon has left as a legacy in order to build more trust. Because as long as the settlements keep on happening, which was of course originally Sharon's brainchild from the 1970s onwards in a big way, I think this peace process is only on paper.
Okay.